one. Let's go ahead and get started. Anna, I see your question. Will we have access to the recording presentation? Yes. We will be sending a link to the recording and a link to the presentation, hopefully early next week. So let's go ahead and get started. I see other people are still joining, but we want to be mindful of everyone's time, and we do have a lot of material to get through today. So my name is Daisy Ramirez. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a member of the People's Budget Orange County Coalition, and I am here to kind of kick things off today. So as you all know, today's workshop is titled Money Talks. It's presented by People's Budget Orange County in partnership with Civilytics. You all will be hearing more from Jared shortly. And we are going all the way through 12:30 today. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be covering. We'll start off with some introductions. We'll share more about the coalition. We'll go through community guidelines. And then after that, we will turn it over to Jennifer to walk us through a Jamboard exercise before we kind of dive into the budget itself. Jared from Civilytics will be leading that part. And then we will segue into a second Jamboard exercise. And then we will wrap up with a call to action, some information about how y'all can stay connected. And then we'll also take questions at the end. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please drop them in the chat. And we do have some chat monitors that are going to be collecting them so that we can respond to them before we wrap up. And before I turn it over to Karen, just another reminder, if there's anyone that's currently on that needs Spanish translation, please reach out to Adriana. Adriana has dropped her cell phone number in the chat. You can also message her via the chat function as well. And I will turn it over to you, Karen.
Thank you. We can go ahead and leave it on this slide. We do want to begin first with an Indigenous land and African labor recognition statement. This was adapted by Melina Abdullah of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, and with the assistance of Reverend Gregory Douglas with the Native American United Methodist Church in Anaheim. And we're going to end with a brief moment of silence. So People's Budget acknowledged that this land in which we inhabit in Orange County is physically situated in the original ancestral homelands of the Achamin, Kizh, and Tongva peoples. We pay respect to these and all Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout their historical diaspora. We pay homage to those who were stolen from Africa, placed in bondage, falsely named as chattel, forced into labor, who were called slaves, but never submitted to such, and have always been fully human, with an unbroken connection to the divine and to each other. We honor our African ancestors for the still unpaid labor which built what is now the Americas. To both our Indigenous and African forebears, we commit to the continued struggle for liberation and reparations, for it is only through freedom and justice that we truly give honor. And we would also like to acknowledge the need for solidarity with Palestinians and our commitment to Palestinian liberation as well. And we'll just have a brief moment of silence. All right, thank you. We can go ahead and move to the next slide. So just want to welcome you, and some of you may know about us, some of you may not know about us, but People's Budget Orange County, we are a coalition of organizations and also individual members. Our mission is to advocate for a participatory public budget that allows marginalized communities to be involved in decision-making through public education, directly engaging representatives, listening to and uplifting the voices and needs of marginalized communities. We're committed to economic and racial justice. We fight for a participatory county budget that is transparent, in alignment with our community values, and responsive to community needs. We envision a society that invests in community care and divests from carceral responses to economic, political, and social needs. So welcome. We're super happy to have you here on this beautiful Saturday morning. If you feel comfortable, we would love to know your name. If you'd like to share this information in the chat, your gender pronouns, if you would like to include the city or any organization that you're affiliated with as well, please do so in the chat. Next slide.
Talking to myself. So I'll start with some of the community guidelines. And feel free to add any guidelines that we may not have included in our slides in the chat as well. So 1, share your knowledge, be active, engage, discuss at your own capacity. 2, we will not tolerate anti-Blackness, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, racism, sexism, fat phobia, savior charity ideology, and or classism. 3, use people-centered, people-first language. For example, unhoused people, incarcerated individuals, we always want to make sure that we are centering the dignity and humanity of every person. 4, share the space, step up and step back. 5, listen and ask clarifying questions. 6, this is a safe space to talk about and question the nature of police and government spending. 7, one person, one mic. 8, recognize and account for intent versus impact. 9, respect confidentiality, share learnings, do not attribute without permission. 10, attendees will stay muted during the presentation. And 11, attendees who would like to ask questions during the meeting may do so in the chat. So we actually don't have the Q&A enabled. So again, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat and our chat monitors will collect those so that we can respond to them before we wrap up. And with that, I will turn it over to Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Daisy and Karen, for welcoming us in. So before we get into a really informative discussion, we wanted to take the time to hear from everyone who's present. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So we are going to do a virtual Jamboard activity where we're basically going to ask folks in just a minute to follow the link that I'm going to paste into the chat now. And what it's going to bring you to is to a Google Jamboard. And so we're going to do this activity to really have kind of a virtual poster and post-it session. So if we were in person, we would be doing this with actual post-its, but we're virtual, so we're going to do this on Google Jamboard. So if folks can click on that link in the chat, I am going to also share my screen, and I'm going to invite you to click on the little sticky note that's going to be to the left of your screen. And we're going to ask everyone to answer the question, what resources does your community need? Okay, so you can take that to interpret, you know, any community that you see, whether it's the County of Orange, your city that you're calling in from, your neighborhood, what resources does your community need? So now I'm going to share my screen, and I hope everyone, I see folks are in the Google Jamboard, and I already see folks are doing it. So thank you so much. I am going to share my screen now. And let's. Excellent. Okay, so we're gonna just take 2 minutes to do this. So folks can, you know, again, if you can see my screen and perhaps my mouse cursor, this post-it note is to the left of your computer screen. And if you're calling in on a cell phone, please type your response to this question, what resources does your community need, into the chat box. And Felicity, our helpful IT person today, is going to paste it into this Google Jamboard for us. And with that said, I see a lot of really excellent responses so far. Accessible mental health services, affordable housing, free quality healthcare for all, supportive services for substance use and mental health, more affordable housing for people with extremely low and very low incomes, helping people gain employment to prevent homelessness, community services, public safety that doesn't rely on state violence, free legal services, mental health and substance use care, support for our schools, no more shelters, safe and well-maintained parks, trails, green space, access to food for the hungry in our community, universal representation for our immigrant community. So thanks everyone so much for taking part in this activity. We're going to do this again later on, but it's so helpful to see, the kind of vision for what we all want in our community and for the County of Orange as we get into this really exciting budget presentation. So I'm going to pass it back over to the facilitators.
So we wanted to also just share some information with y'all in terms of, what those sticky notes on the Jamboard exercise look like. And in 2020, People's Budget did a survey of over 1,000 people in Orange County to ask them, what are the priorities that they believe should be invested in? And I think a lot of the same answers that y'all gave were the same, very similar responses. We gave them lots of different options, including, what was most important to them and what was least important to them. And as you can see here on this slide, one of the least important things is obviously the Sheriff's Department, jails, the DA. The most important thing, public health, mental health programs, a lot of the same information that folks have named today. So just wanted to, we were hoping that the message is consistent. This is definitely something that we want to continue to share, especially with people within the county that control the county budget, which is the Board of Supervisors. And we did share a copy of this report with them also when we released it in 2020. Next slide. And again, just want to share sort of some comparison in terms of percentages as to, the items that we surveyed during this time. So it was community services, which included public health, mental health programs, affordable housing and supportive services, anti-racist education, rent relief, environmental and climate change were obviously very important things. And unfortunately, what the county prioritizes is social control. They call it public protection. We call it social control, which is the Sheriff's Department, District Attorney. And it's really stark, the comparison and how 17% of the discretionary budget, which is about a $1 billion pot of money, goes to 55% of it at that time was going to public protection. And you'll see once Jared starts his presentation that they're still pretty much in line with this exact formula here. Next slide. So we would,
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Daisy.
Thanks. So next, Dr. Jared Knowles is going to be walking us through what is the discretionary budget and how the county is spending their money. So a little bit more about Dr. Knowles. Dr. Knowles is the president of Civilytics Consulting. He has read, analyzed, and collaborated with grassroots organizers on more than 50 city and county budgets since the year 2020, and has trained dozens of organizations across the country on how to read and engage with their local budgets. Civilytics has worked with organizers to understand and analyze the LA and Orange County budgets, as well as city budgets across the state. Dr. Knowles previously served in the budget office for the state education agency in Wisconsin and holds a PhD in political science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And with that, I will turn it over to Jared.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. and great to be here. And what I always like to say when I'm doing these presentations is that it's really, for me, it's a very positive thing that so many people will show up on a Saturday to try to take back control over their public resources and public dollars. What we're going to talk about, you'll see, you probably already feel that there does feel like a strong disconnect, that we don't feel ownership over our public dollars and what's done with our tax dollars in our names. And you're on the front line of fixing that. And so it's really exciting for me to be able to talk with you and think about how we can work on that together. And this kind of sums it up overall, that there are public budgets that surround us in our lives. So often the federal budget gets most of the attention, but we all actually sit underneath at least 5 budgets when you're in California, 5 public budgets that are determined every year. The federal budget, then there's the state budget, the county budget, your city budget, and the school district budget. All of those budgets are determined annually through elected officials making decisions. And in fact, there's over 4,400 governments in the state of California with a budget. So that just tells you that budgets are everywhere, and yet they don't feel accessible to us, and they don't feel like something we have a lot of control over, even though they're done in our name. So let's look at the next slide. One of the real challenges with budgets is that we are used to thinking about our household budget. $100 isn't nothing. $1,000 is a big decision. $10,000 is really big decision. And beyond that, we're talking about borrowing money from banks and things like this. The government operates on a totally different scale. And so we're talking about millions and billions and trillions of dollars. And how do we kind of get a sense of how that is? So what I like to do is have this exercise for you to take a quiz about Orange County's budget, where you can guess how much money Orange County spends. And you'll have some ideas presented to you, some examples to anchor your guess. So I'll read the first question, but the link is in the chat. But for the first question about how much money does Orange County spend each year in total as a government? So your choices would be $75 million, which is the estimated annual revenue of Knott's Berry Farm, $4 billion, which is the annual budget of UC Irvine, $8 billion, which was the first quarter revenue of Disney's theme parks last year, 18.6 billion, which is the combined spending on the CSU and California Community College system, or 105 billion, which is the latest estimate of the total cost of the high-speed rail project in California. So there's 4 questions here. Just take your best guess, read through what the comparisons are, and we'll take 3 minutes for you to do that, and then we'll look at your responses. And this will be a good way for us all to get grounded in these sort of large numbers of budgets. I'm seeing the responses come in over here. That looks great. Keep going.
I should have queued up some Jeopardy music, but there's a lot of interesting answers. There's definitely wrong answers, and there's incredibly
There's wrong answers and there's wrong answers.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
That's what I was
exactly.
trying to get to.
Yep. Yeah, 2023, I'm going to up my Zoom game by figuring out how to integrate Jeopardy question audio or filler audio a lot more. Be like a full-on TV production finally. Oh, we're up to 8 responses. That's great. We'll wait a couple more minutes for people to finish up, and then we'll review your responses.
And Jared, I can go ahead and stop sharing if you want to share your screen for the responses.
Okay, great. I'll do that. Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm going to just briefly review the responses. I've been having this problem with my Zoom, so I'm apologize for my audio here. And let my Zoom just work itself out. Sorry, that's a new bug of my Zoom. I cannot share a browser window successfully. I thought I fixed it yesterday, but I actually cannot do that. So I'm going to just read a couple of these, and I'll give the answer. We can put the answers up on the screen, and I'm gonna go through the answers, and then we'll carry on with the presentation. Sorry about that. So the first one, how much money does Orange County spend each year? Actually, most people got it right. So we have some ringers in the room. It's about $8 billion. It fluctuates year to year, but it's about the same as Disney's first quarter revenue from all of its theme parks combined. So that's how much money the supervisors are deciding about each year. The second one, so how much does the Orange County Sheriff spend per year? The group was divided. Some folks said 1.2 billion, some folks said 4.7, and a couple folks said 670. It's closest to 1.2 billion, which is the annual operating budget of the Orange County Transportation Authority. So those are sort of equal, relatively equal. It's 900 million in some money, and then there's other spending that occurs near it. So that's a closest of one comparable one I could find. Excluding grants and revenue from state and federal governments, which we'll talk about in a second, about how much does Orange County spend of its own money on probation and custody each year. Here, you all were more pessimistic than reality as a group. The main guess was 1.9 billion, which is the estimated cost to purchase the Anaheim Angels. But some folks were very optimistic, said it was 69 million, which is the annual revenue from the Honda Center. It's actually in between it, and it's actually not possible from the way the county reports the budget to be sure, but we know it's at least 100 million, and it could be as much as 300 million every year. It bounces between, because they don't report all of their federal and state revenue consistently into those categories, and we'll talk about that. And then finally, outside of grants and aid from other governments, how much does Orange County spend on housing and community development? So of its own money, the greatest baseball player ever, Shohei Ohtani, in a week makes as much as Orange County decides to put of its own money toward housing and community development spending. It relies heavily on the state and federal government to do all of the spending that it does on housing and community development. It does not contribute its own money toward that, except a nominal amount, which a good baseball player makes in a week. So that can maybe help some of these huge numbers, billion, million, hundreds of thousands, start to come into focus for us, because I think that's one of the barriers. It's a barrier that our elected officials also face. They're not always that good at it. So I wanted to kind of ground us on that. And then now we're going to go a little bit, where do these numbers come from? We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk about some numbers you can walk away with and share with your friends, family, community members that are really easy for them to get to wrap their mind around and be able to talk comfortably about. So first, let's just talk about this custody and probation. And talking with the PBOC team, we really zoomed in on this because there's sort of two, if you divide the housing policy up, there's sort of two ways we could deal with housing policy. We could hold people in a system of social control, which is custody and probation, or we could provide housing and community development and pathways for people to, get on their feet and thrive. So we wanted to kind of contrast these two types of spending. So the county in its budget spends about $456 million, which will be $144 per every single individual who lives in Orange County on custody and probation. So the jail and probation services after someone is in jail. So monitoring and controlling people after they've been arrested by the sheriff's department. And then in contrast, and again, this is not the county's money. All the money the county brings in gets from the state government, from the federal government, is only going to spend $117 per person, or about $368 million on housing and community development supports. And a lot of stuff is included in community development that some of you may think is good spending and may not think is good spending. So this is the most generous interpretation of this. So the balance is not there. But as we mentioned, when we look at the money the county can decide about, the gap becomes much greater. So on the next slide, we're going to kind of break it down. So we're just talking about total spending, but total spending includes things like required spending by the state government. So the state government, and in California, the state government drives a lot of policy through the budget. It gives a lot of money to counties to do things that the state doesn't want to do. And so the county is like, yeah, we'll take the money and we'll perform that function. A lot of that is around jails and youth detention and adult detention. So the state in California pays a lot of money to counties to do that, so they get a lot of support. It also pays some money for housing programs and things like that. The federal government pays a lot of money for housing. So we're going to talk about what these terms mean, but when we just take one step back from total spending to general fund spending, the general fund, which sort of operates like the checkbook of any government, all governments have a general fund, and it sort of functions as their checkbook. We see that the custody and probation is still spending $431 million out of the county's checkbook, but now housing and community development is down to $588,000. So almost every single dollar spent on housing and community development is controlled by someone other than the county. It's the federal government saying, would you like some money to do this program we'd like you to do? And the county says, okay, we'll do that. We'll take the money and we'll do that program. But the county is not putting its own money forward into those programs. The money controlled by the people in charge of the county deciding on the county. Then there's one more cut, which is net county cost. Net county cost takes into account that every department inside the county can raise revenue for itself. So it can get grants, it can participate in revenue sharing. And this is where it becomes a little harder to find the exact dollar amounts for the custody and probation because there's so many sources of revenue for those, but it's between 105 and 326 million. And then it's only 588,000 for housing and community development. The total pot, we'll talk about this, for net county cost is $1 billion in Orange County. That's money that Orange County could choose to do whatever it wants with. It's like extra money that it has to spend on whatever it would like after it's raised its revenue. And a huge share of that is going to custody and probation. So that's the solution that's being spent, money is being spent on in Orange County. So hopefully that motivates you for what's now the boring part. So I try to front load what's very interesting, but we do want to understand this very complicated accounting procedure that the county goes through, which is somewhat anti-participatory. So let's try to break through that barrier together. Let's look at the next slide. Yeah, what are these terms? Total, general fund, net county costs. Let's get a little more visual about how they work. So the way all government budgets are set up is that the government gets revenue from a lot of different places. So on the left, I have revenue columns. We have property tax, sales tax, fines, user fees for going to the park or renting a kayak, and then state and federal aid from a variety of different state and federal programs, some of which are automatic and some of which require the county to write a proposal for. The county needs to kind of keep track of all this money. So in general, as a simplification, most governments kind of look at the revenue they raise locally, their local taxes, and they put that into what's called the general fund. That's like their checkbook. Then a lot of their other money gets put into special funds. Special funds are like a health savings account that you have or a gift card. You get money from it for that. It is sort of like money, but it's restricted on what you can do with it. So the government may have a bunch of money in a special fund, but it says by law, you can only spend it to put pipes in the ground for your water system, or by law, you can only spend it on, providing education services to people who are housed in the jail currently. And that we'll talk about that at the very end as an example. Then from these funds, each department gets its budget, and their budgets are usually a mix of general fund and special funds. And so as we're seeing, the housing and community development category in Orange County is largely funded by special funds, and the public protection, especially the jail, the probation, and the sheriff's department, are largely funded by the general fund. So it's a simplification, but it's a useful one to say, when you have property tax revenue and sales tax revenue coming out of the pockets of people who live in Orange County, it's largely going to those services. And then you also are contributing to your state and federal taxes, of course, but I'm also contributing to the federal budget that your county is relying on to do its housing spending as well. So when it comes to money raised in Orange County, it goes more toward policing and social control, as Karen mentioned. So that, I hope, is enough detail for you to make your voice heard. And we'll talk now about what the numbers look like in the most recent budget for Orange County. So just a quick, I guess I already said this, but a good way to think about the general fund is that it represents money that could be spent on different choices. So special funds often can't. You collected the money for water service, you by law have to spend it on the water service. General fund doesn't have a by law, you have to spend it on X. So it's really important to focus on the general fund and talk about it, because it's money that could have been allocated to other things. That's all we really need to keep in mind when thinking about it. I think we're next going to zoom in on net county cost. Net county cost is a California thing. So in California, the general fund sometimes includes money from the state, like I said, but the net county cost represents sort of the unallocated revenue where the county hasn't made any commitments about what it's going to do with it. And then it's using that money to top up the budgets of the departments that it would like to support with its own money. So general fund, it represents a diversity of choices. But the state sticks its hand in the general fund in California with counties. It works very closely with them and gives them money through the general fund. Net county cost is a smaller amount of money, but it is truly unrestricted in that the county could truly spend that money on any activity that it would like to undertake that it has the authority to do. And general fund is also similar, but it's a little more restricted than the net county cost. So we're just kind of getting freer and freer, but smaller and smaller pots of money. Let's go to the next slide. So Orange County, we guessed, had $8.8 billion. Of that, $4.8 billion is the general fund. So this represents a variety of choices that the county can make. And out of that $4.8 billion, $1 billion winds up being net county cost, which is that freest amount. So if you want to be generous to the county, you could say the county has $1 billion to decide what to do, whatever it wants to do with it. You can be a little less generous, which would be fine, and say it's actually 4.8 billion, and they should be arguing about how to allocate the 4.8 billion. Both are right, depending on the context that we're talking about and the level of detail that the conversation is at. But you'll always be right that they could take that 1 billion and they could, they could make the Anaheim Angels become the team that is, they could buy that team if they chose to do that. And buy out the owners and make it a public baseball team. That's a choice. So that's truly free dollars. So yeah, now we'd like to think about how would you spend this truly free $1 billion in Orange County. And we heard a little bit from the survey before about what people's priorities were. But I think we're going to ask people to put this on the Jamboard, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Jared. Yeah, so just like Jared was sharing about $1 billion in the county every single year being, at the fingertips of our Orange County supervisors, we are curious to know, what would this group of people do with $1 billion for our communities? So we invite everyone to go back onto that SharePoint, the Jamboard link that I'm going to paste into the chat. So click on the link in the chat. And if you can't click on it for some reason, or you can't participate, please answer the question in the chat box itself. So again, the question is, how would you spend $1 billion? So I'm going to share my screen. And again, the the way that you fill out a sticky note is you click on this sticky note icon on the left of your computer screen. Once you click it, it'll bring up the sticky note and you can type your answer. Okay, so we're gonna spend 2 minutes again on this. Yes, and I already see some really excellent answers here. So how would you spend $1 billion? Also on the Jamboard, you'll see what Google says is a visual representation of $1 billion. And like Jared said, the amount of money that it would take to purchase the Anaheim Angels. So yeah, we are curious. Please fill out your sticky notes. Yes. And one more note, in the way that you get to the second page of the Jamboard is you simply click this right arrow at the top of your screen when you're on the Jamboard link. And so if you see my cursor here, it's at the very top in the center of your screen on Jamboard. You'll get to the second page of our virtual poster. So I'm seeing some really excellent answers here. I see alternatives to incarceration, step down programs and facilities, credible messengers and peer counseling instead of probation officers. Absolutely. Mental health. I see a lot of permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, permanent supportive housing. So clearly housing is a big priority of our group. Mental health, social workers. Yes, and more yes. Free public transportation, free legal services, non-police response to emergencies. Yes. Better pay for social workers. Absolutely. Folks, I remember a Voice of OC article that spoke on the lack of a living wage for social workers in Orange County. Alternatives to police, sheriffs, neighborhood violence interrupters, youth centers, and counselors. Yes, we keep us safe. Food security, access to nutrition. Yeah, more schools, more teachers, smaller classrooms, more school interventions for neurodiverse students. Yes. Expand health services to all. Yeah, thank you all so much. This is resonating so much. If anything resonates more with you, I encourage folks to continue the conversation in the chat. And this is excellent and absolutely People's Budget OC's vision for how we would spend that $1 billion. So I'm going to pass it back over to Jared and stop sharing my screen. Thanks y'all so much.
Yeah, you are all much more imaginative than the County Board of Supervisors in thinking about the array of services that could be provided with the 1 billion. And that's why we need to make sure you have a voice in the process, because these are great ideas that are very affordable when you think about a $1 billion pot of money. It's not a situation where we will be having hard choices. So you could get a lot of those things for $1 billion a year. So I wanted to kind of show this point. This is from the PBOC budget. This is how they present it. So we're just going to show you a little bit of what they show. So they were, if I was them and you criticized me and you said, I wish you didn't spend so much on public protection. And I would show you this and I would say, well, you know what? $8.8 billion. We're only spending 1 out of every 5 of those dollars, 20% on public protection. So really, you can't be criticizing us for that. Look at how much money we're spending on community services. But if we go to the next slide and we look at the general fund, oh, the picture's starting to change a little bit. Now we're spending 1 out of every $3 of the general fund. And we're spending half of our money on the community services. So you think, okay, well, that's still pretty good. I'm trying to, do the community services thing. But then let's look at the net county costs where we really have that true freedom. So the next slide breaks down the net county cost. And then you see that of the $1 billion, 53.6% of it is going to public protection. Only 17% of it is going to community services. The environment gets a whopping 3.8%. And I believe that folks in Orange County are pretty on the caring about, the rising sea, the rising temperatures, the rising heat, all of these issues, but the county board does not seem to be making those investments. And general government services is much larger, for example, than that. So, that there's a strategy to having these three numbers. There's a political advantage to it in that we can change the goalposts and talk about different ones to make it seem like we're meeting everybody's needs. So we can tell the police department that we are spending most of our money on public protection, but we can tell the public we're only spending 1/5 of it. So we have to be a little fluent in this kind of annoying accounting system so that we can make our case and demonstrate that we want different things to be made. So that one last slide will show the sort of evolution of the public protection budget, although they changed the colors across the pie chart. So you can't like follow the public protection growing each time, which annoys me. But it starts at 20% and goes all the way up to 50% when we start to think about different ways of deciding what the available funds are for us. So we should talk a little bit more about what goes in to public protection. And what the other categories are. So one way I like to look at this is just put the total spending and to put the total spending there first, and then contrast it with the net county cost. So on the next slide, just to make this point really clear, a way to think about it is if other governments weren't willing to pay for these items, how much money would they still get? So if the state and the federal government weren't willing to contribute to these, how much would Orange County be spending on them? And the answer here you can see is that, we would have a very few. The yellow bar would be what we would spend out of the net county cost, what Orange County is choosing to spend. And the blue bar is what the total spending is. So we see, again, that when we take away the revenue that comes from our state government, from our federal government, who's also putting strings attached to those dollars and saying you'll have to do X to get this money, the sort of strings not attached money is going toward public protection, the public protection budget by a long shot. And so, absent the state and federal government, not much would be happening for infrastructure and environmental spending in Orange County, as an example. There's also an interesting wrinkle in Orange County in that there's a budget and then they augment their budget. So you see this word on the screen, augmentations. This is a pretty shady practice. I actually was brought to my attention by the OC crew, PBOC crew. I'd not seen it in other communities where after they pass the budget, they immediately, a few weeks later, have a second budget hearing that's not publicly advertised very well, and they make some additions to the budget. So if we look on the next slide, we see that a lot of those additions go to public protection. So they publish the budget, they tell you all what they're going to do, and then they're like, actually, we got to make some changes, and those changes tend to put more money to the sheriff and probation and less money, or don't add money to the other services. It makes sense that proportionally follows the money they have available, but so the sticker price isn't the sticker price in Orange County. And so that's really another advocacy challenge to kind of have good governance over the funding that struck me. There's probably other counties in California that do this, but I like I said at the beginning, I read a lot of budgets across the country. It's not a common practice. It's not necessary practice either. So it doesn't need to be done this way, but it's worth naming. Let's just talk a little bit then about within public protection, we have the sheriff, probation, district attorney, public defender, the trial courts, and the largest of those are the sheriff and probation. So that's the idea of that the public protection should be relabeled social control. There's the PBOC group has thought about that, and they have a point, right? That this isn't, this is money that's going toward programs and things that are about controlling people's behavior and punishing them. And so that, calling it public protection, that's a statement made by the county, but it's not what you have to call it. You can call it something else. Because that's one of the big powers of budget advocacy, And I think it's, it's not written in stone that it has to be called public protection. So I think it's important to try to look within those categories that the county asserts and say, what are they really doing? What is the true nature of this spending? So a couple other facts. It's just an enormous amount of spending on public protection. So if we just took it the total sticker price, another way to think about it is for every single person in the county, including, I always name that it includes children who don't pay taxes. It's $558 out of their pocket for this. And after we include the augmentations, it's $576 for every person in Orange County every year is going toward public protection spending. So when you're thinking about, this 1.8 billion is a big number. Another way to break it down sometimes is to think about all the people in Orange County opening up their wallet and pulling out $576 and putting it on the table. And that is what they're buying with that amount of money. So let's just zoom in on the sheriff a little bit and think about what are some things we can learn by looking at one of the biggest budget items. An extremely useful number when thinking about budgets is how much it costs for an employee, the government, to have one employee do one job. The average cost of one sheriff employee in Orange County is $204,000. Now, that's not their salary. That is the cost to employ them. So that includes all of their taxes, benefits, sick leave, all of these benefits that they get, equipment, a little bit of their equipment. And it's what the sheriff's, the way we calculated this is sheriff tells us how much they spend on salary and benefits, and we divide it by the number of people that the sheriff's department employs. It's probably an underestimate of how much each employee costs because not all those people may be in those jobs all the time. So that's the budgeted jobs, not the filled jobs. But it's a really useful shorthand. So remember, you spend $586,000 on housing from your own budget, but each and every sheriff employee costs the county $204,000 a year. So 3 sheriff employees, and they've covered their contributions toward the housing crisis in Orange County every year. This number, 204,000, is very useful for advocacy because you can express the things you would like to do in terms of how many sheriff employees they would cost the county to give up. And how many sheriff employees is that? Well, let's look. On the next slide, I just want to, this is for reference. This lists out all of the items that might be included in that full 204,000. So you can kind of break that down. But I think let's just think about how many employees there are who work in the sheriff's office. So let's look at the next slide. So 1 out of every 5 county employees works for the sheriff's department. So another way to look at your county budget is to think, what does the county pay people to do? Just like if you run a business, if you want to know what the business does, look at what it pays people to do. The Orange County employs 3,773 sheriff's deputies, or sheriff's employees total, 1,074 employees for probation. In total, that public protection, the probation, the sheriff, plus some smaller amounts of people in the courts and the public defender's office. So about 1 out of every 3 county employees works in that function. So one could characterize Orange County as a sheriff's office and a jail that also contributes nominally to some other functions and runs a water system and does a couple other things. But where it puts its people is in this kind of a role. And that means that most of the spending that happens in the jail and in the sheriff's department is not on bullets or gas for their cars or stuff like that. It's salaries and benefits to 3,773 employees in the sheriff's department. This is an extremely expensive job to fill for the county, and it's one that there's a lot of people who hold that job from the county's perspective. So that is another way to kind of make the budget tangible, to kind of ask the question, what is our county's priorities? Well, its priorities are where it chooses to hire people and have them do activities, and the activities they're asking them to do fall in 1 out of every 3 employees in this public protection function. So the last thing I want to talk about is a special fund. So the sheriff's office has many special funds that fund it, but They have two that are required by statute, the commissary and inmate welfare funds. And they generate revenue from the people held in the jail. And they are ostensibly required to spend that revenue on services to support and help the people who are in that jail when they re-enter. So let's just, PBOC did a lot of work to get more information than is in the budget, because the budget, you'll find budgets don't answer a lot of questions you might have as a member of the public about spending. They are very high level documents without a lot of detail on the very important questions about exactly what is being done with the money. They're more like a statement of what they hope to accomplish and who they're going to give the money to accomplish it to. So these funds add up to about $10 million in annual spending. And they're supposed to provide food and commissary goods to people in jail and to support rehabilitative programming and well-being for people in jail. So if you know something about the Orange County Jail, you can think $10 million divided by the number of people who are there, divided by the number of days. How much are they budgeting to support and provide services to those people, including food every day? That's a number that you can use with your budget advocacy. But I want to talk about the purpose and then what we've been able to learn from what's in there. So I'm going to show what the budget says, the purpose of the jail commissary. I'm just going to read the highlighted part here. The primary goal of the jail commissary operation is to provide high quality products and services to those incarcerated in the sheriff's jail facilities. That's what they say. So we're going to look at what they identify as high quality. The Inmate Welfare Fund allows the majority of Orange County Sheriff Coroner Department's inmate rehabilitation programs. That means it pays for them. And it's funded in part by the commissary through revenue generated from inmate telephone use and profits from inmate purchases. So inmates are required to purchase things through the commissary. The commissary gets a profit. That profit is required by law to go into the Inmate Welfare Fund. And it's supposed to support these activities. Inmate rehabilitation activities that are planned, coordinated, conducted, and evaluated at each of the Sheriff Department's jail facilities by the Correctional Programs Unit. Typical programs include certified education and academic studies, vocational and education training, general and law library services, religious and inspirational programs, and pre-release preparation and post-release assistance. So we wanted, PBOC wanted to find out what's going on. They asked for a bunch of documents about how is this money being spent. And I've done a little bit of looking through them. At Civilytics, we've done that, and I'll share a couple things with you. One, between 42 and 56% of the money spent at the commissary is on salary and benefits for people who work in the commissary. So take the money, the high quality money, the money is supposed to buy high quality products, and it's already cut in half, and half of it is supporting salaries and benefits of the people who are working in that department. And only about a quarter of the commissary's expenses are for food, and about 4 to 6% are for clothing and personal supplies. So that can help us. Then what about the Inmate Welfare Fund? Well, the Sheriff's Department makes $3 million a year, which charging people in jail to call their lawyers and loved ones. That's where the revenue for the Inmate Welfare Fund, but almost all of the Inmate Welfare Fund spending is for staff, salaries and benefits for employees of the Orange County Sheriff's Department. There's very few non-staff expenses. So we have to believe, we don't know anything about the details about who those staff are. We'd have to believe this then, that those employees are certified and authorized and trained to provide those high quality services that the law says that the fund needs to support. So that's an open question. But let's look at some of their non-staff expenses that we were able to identify from their receipts. They subscribe to the LA Times paper, the La Opinion Spanish newspaper. They bought some TVs. There's validated parking validation, which was down in 2020, 2021, but was normally about $60,000. They have a law library subscription, and then they have some jail supplies. So some of these are recurring, some of these are one time. A good question to find out we don't know, they don't publish any information in the budget that tells us, are people getting these services? What do people get the newspaper when they're in jail? Where does the newspaper go? This kind of gives some information about how you might be able to ask folks who've been inside the jail, what services did you receive? The county says that you should have got these services. There should have been an LA Times subscription for you, etc. And does that line up with the actual experience of someone who's held there? And that, that's after a huge work to get a big public records request, reading through the budget, that's the level of detail that is made available for this type of money, despite the fact that there's strict requirements on how it's spent in state law, the fact that it's raised from people who are held in the jail. We don't have a good sense of what the controls, and we don't know who the people who are funded out of this fund, their salaries are funded. We don't know what their training or the requirements are for their training, or the frequency of services that they provide, or the number of people who receive those services. So my last thing I'll just say about that before we close for questions is just think about your public school system and the level of information that you might have about that. And public school system's a large public entity. And I worked in K-12 education, so I'm always making this contrast in my mind. But, a lot of public schools account down to the pencil. What's going on in the classroom, who's providing what, how many minutes of instruction students receive. And that is not the level of accountability and transparency that's available for this type of spending. So that's a kind of closing thought about what we're able to find about that before we have any questions that folks have.
Thank you so much for all of that info, Jared. I know that you responded to a couple of questions that folks dropped in the chat earlier, and there were others that were dropped. Let me see. I see Sean followed up with the question, does the 204,000 per sheriff include contributions to covered retired sheriff pensions?
Oh, this is a can of worms, Sean. Good question. It does if you believe that the current employees' pension contributions will be enough to cover both themselves and the people who are currently retired, which is a myth that as a society we're mostly going with for all of us. So by the books, by accounting, it does cover that. In reality, there's sort of a growing and accumulating unfunded debt for all public pensions. It's not just for the sheriff. So theirs are bigger because their salaries are bigger and their pensions are bigger. But there's an unfunded debt that is accumulating, but you can't really pin down how much it is from the budget alone.
Thank you, Jared, and thanks for that question, Sean. Then I see Andrea dropped, do you have data for Santa Ana City Jail as it reflects for inmate welfare spending? I see Karen responded, we don't, we only PRA'd info for the county jail system. That's been responded to. Deborah dropped in the chat, how many city jails are there in Orange County, and are they paid by those cities without help from OC?
I don't know that specifically. Every city and county has like different relationships about how they distribute the workload of jailing. And I don't know the specifics yet in Orange County, but it's something we can look into.
Definitely. Yeah, I also don't have the number off the top of my head, but I know in Orange County, there's the county jail system that's run by the Orange County Sheriff's Department. The Orange County Sheriff's Department also contracts with cities that don't have their own city police department or city jail. And then there are the other cities like Santa Ana, which has its own police department and its own jail. I just don't know that breakdown. I don't know if anyone else on the call has that info. I'm seeing nods from folks, but definitely something that we can look into, Deborah. Thanks for the question. Any other questions? Go for it, Karen.
So the only thing I was going to say is it might be helpful also, because I know some folks may be on their phone, if we want to just read some of the other questions that were also answered in the chat. or asked and answered in the chat. So Shauna, I think, originally asked about probation and custody and money that might be spent on the state AB 109 money. Does anyone know if that's right? And the answer was AB 109 is a large portion of probation and custody. And AB 109 has some flexibility, but that flexibility is often not used by counties who mostly allocate it directly to the jail and the staff at the jail. Another question was, do the numbers for custody and probation include contracts for facility operations with vendors, such as calling and communication systems inside the jails, commissary, and et cetera? That was from Andrea. And the answer to that is custody and probation numbers do include vendor services, and it is all spending. So we will talk about how the spending in the departments break down a little bit later, which Jared did go over during the presentation. But if there's additional questions, there's definitely, like, anytime you look at a Board of Supervisors meeting agenda, it's basically them approving budget after budget after budget. So you see often, like, the sheriff, the different, like, vendor contracts that are being expanded. And there was earlier this year, I think it was like in May, they gave something millions and millions of dollars for some operational services that were for, I think, a new contract with GTL, which is the phone company that works inside the jails. And then also just wanted to share that we will be sharing the presentation slides and the recording of this presentation to everybody who registered after as well. One other question was, are augmentations eventually published? OC is the third largest county in the state. How do these numbers compare to other large counties who also get money from the state and California, other programs? I'm not sure if this was answered yet or not.
Augmentations are published. That's an easy one. Eventually, after they've been decided. The counties I'm the most familiar with are LA and OC, and the proportions are pretty similar for LA and OC. LA has more money than OC per person and spends some of that extra money on is supposed to be spending some of that extra money on alternatives, supports for people, on housing, on homelessness initiatives, houselessness initiatives. But that actually in LA, they're finding that they won the budget line item, and now the county's not implementing the budget wishes. So their fight is a little different. They have the resources allocated in some sense, but now the actual execution and administration of those resources is something the county is not taking up with the vigor that they would hope. There are some counties, like I'm thinking about near what is the town? Starts with an M. It was 2 years ago, but they spent much more on their jail proportionally than OC, but they're a much smaller county, and their county used jail facilities as a revenue source. Particularly, it was a place with a lot of youth detention. So I would say OC and LA are very similar, even though LA has some more extra resources to try to purchase items that maybe are less social control, but they're not actually getting that money effectively spent, even though it's budgeted. So the result is fairly similar still.
Thank you, Jared. There are a couple of other questions here. John Underwood is asking, how much of the NCC funding is funding the Be Well collaboration to refer unhoused off the streets and into institutional settings? I don't know that we have that information, because the Be Well, it's not exactly broken down in the budget by, like, this is the program that it is. They kind of, I think, lump in. But Jared, if that sounds familiar to you at all, feel free to jump in.
No, you're absolutely right. So it's not, that level of detail is unfortunately not available in budgets, which is what we often care about. But we could say that it's not likely, it's likely that a lot of it is not net county cost, but we would have to ask the county to kind of provide that level of breakdown, because the highest, like the most detailed that gets in the community services is like the healthcare agency's budget, which has $94 million of net county costs, but we don't know how much of that do they distribute to the specific programs within it.
Thank you. There's another question from Nathan as well. Out of what funds are settlements for sheriff misconduct paid? Special, general, something else? And does the county buy police brutality bonds?
Yeah, this is a common question. Almost all governments budget their sort of insurance for liability differently. So there's not a line item for insurance, and there's not a line item for settlements for the Orange County Sheriff's Department or jail in the budget. We pull those out when we find them, but we do not find them. So it's often just part of their general government services budget line item, and it doesn't necessarily get broken down. So it's something you would have to find out by PRA. The county buys a lot of bonds. It does a lot of bonding. I'm not sure. Orange County doesn't strike me as a county that needs to issue bonds to cover its regular operating costs. So it probably considers settlements against the county as a normal operating cost and doesn't necessarily bond specifically for those operations. But I couldn't say for sure about that as well.
Thank you so much, Jared. So we want to welcome folks to, kind of join in the conversation with us. I know this was a lot of information. There's a lot of really great questions. But we also, if you feel comfortable and you want to maybe raise your hand and talk about maybe what surprised you, what motivated you, do you feel, motivated to do something, willing to do something about it? This is the time to kind of, jump into the conversation if you feel comfortable with doing so. Go ahead, Andrea.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation and the breakdown. It was really informative and very helpful for folks like us who should be paying closer attention to some of these misuse of funds, perhaps, and invisible funding that we can't actually see. I really am interested in taking a look at further numbers and figures for city jails and what that might look like. Jared and other folks, if you all do decide or would like to take a further look at that, I would really love to connect on this, because I think that's an area that is very gray, and we don't know where the funding comes from, how much of it is from OC help, and where does it go to exactly? Because I think we look at the county stuff so much, but a lot of the city stuff starts to fall in between the cracks, and we know that there is still very much work to be done within the city jails. So thank you very much for this session, y'all. It was great to be here.
Thank you so much. And Jared, I don't know, I know that when you had facilitated the Budget to Save Lives work, like retreat, and there was how to how to start a budget analysis. Perhaps we could share that information out with folks too. I have the link in the chat. I have the link and I can drop it in the chat if you would be okay with that.
Yeah, of course, definitely. I was just trying also to Google if there's a lot of people who've been able to get jail spending by city. So I'm just looking really quick to see if I can find something that would cover Santa Ana and Orange County too. But yeah, that'd be great to share. I'm happy to have that shared.
Yeah, so this is just a super quick, kind of 5 steps on how to start a budget analysis, where to look, kind of how to get information. But again, we will be sharing, the slides. We'll include this information when we follow up with folks. They'll be included in the slides as also, how to get in contact also with Jared. And Haley, I see your hand. Let me just unmute you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Karen. I'm so glad that Felicity brought this to my attention, our attention in the OCOI meeting. So thanks, Felicity and Karen, of course. This was great, in agreement with everything that was shared already. Jared, really interesting data. I have been wanting to get involved in your work for a long time, and I'm so busy with work and life that it's hard. But I just, OCOI, we have a lot of avenues of like spreading the word with our census partners, et cetera. So I just want to say, like, I'm so motivated to make sure that more people are filling out the darn survey. 1,000 is great, but more. And just, you know, like to Denise's point, like you should have more and more people should come, because this is the most powerful thing that we can do as residents, other than voting, is to advocate for how the funding is used. So thank you so much. And I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much. David?
Yes, thank you, Karen, and thank you, Jared. What a great presentation. My question is, you mentioned 1 out of 5 employees are directly related into, what they call, public protection. Do we have any stats on how that relates to healthcare or health? Public protection, there's that term health and safety, but how many employees are actually does the county have to provide healthcare for the people? Thank you.
Thanks, David. It's 1 out of 3 in public protection, and 1 out of 5 is just the sheriff's department. So that's just as a reminder, the sheriff has about 3,773 positions. I'm looking at the budget right now. The healthcare agency, the OC healthcare agency, has 2,908 positions, so about 860 less. We don't know what those folks are doing. Some of them might be providing healthcare services in the jail, for example. So that's like kind of a question. And then, like the Public Works Agency for your whole county has 333 employees to provide the public works, streets and stuff like that. So those are a couple examples, but your county does do a pretty good job of telling what department the employees are in, but not necessarily within those pretty big departments, what each employee is necessarily doing. So within the healthcare agency, it's not as easy to find out how many people are providing certain types of services. But with some extra digging, it could be possible, but that's a quick answer.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for those questions and for all the responses. If people have other questions, please continue to drop them in the chat. I am going to reshare the presentation again, because we do have a call to action that we want to bring to your attention. And there was another question that got dropped about more people need to be aware of these webinars. Where are you posting this info for people to attend? The turnout is low when there are 3 million in the county. So we'll also talk about some of the things that we want to do in 2023. When we make this webinar available, I think we'll likely post it on our YouTube channel, but we'll be sure to send the link to everyone that registered for today's event. And let me go back to the slide deck. And Pat or Dave, I will turn it over to you all to talk more about the upcoming Board of Supervisors meeting.
Thanks, Daisy. This has been so great. And I swear to heaven, I never thought I'd want to be a budget nerd, but now I want to be that when I grow up. So thank you, Jared, whatever those years are left. And it's so puzzling, and yet we're learning more than many we're finding the Board of Supervisors know. So thank you. And thank you all who are here. I'm here with Dave and others in the space from Housing is a Human Right OC. And for the past many years prior to COVID, we went to the Board of Supervisors to read the names of the folks who died on the street, what we call without fixed abode. It's a very powerful event. And on the 20th, I'm so sorry, I know what day it is, at the Board of Supervisors meeting on the 12th or the 20th, if you've got that flyer, that would be great. We will be attending the Board of Supervisors meeting with the intention of reading into the record the 484 persons who died since last December. And we're asking you to join us in that action. And when we talk about budget and what was the term? Augmentations, their favorite act, just in this meeting alone, rough look, $50 million is on the table. I mean, this just goes on constantly. So while we may not address specifically all those items, we would invite you to come speak to whatever you'd like to speak, but also help us read those names. We often do these actions, people who are watching from home, and that is many times many of us, but also it brings others into the space. So at 8:30, we'll gather for a rally and also hand out speaker cards. If all you want to do is attend, that's a gift. Occupying space is huge. And we'll be bringing our purple flags, which we used since Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week, and those were to honor and memorialize the deaths of many. We'll have a toolkit that you can use if there are ways you want to go with your conversation. And I want to drop in the chat a link to our HHROC meeting on Monday, the 12th. And that will be for some last preparation, and you're welcome to join us for that as well. Maura worked on the toolkit and we're looking forward to that. I think, yeah, the next slide has some of the bit.ly information, and our website will have a lot of info. But again, if you can just be there with us at 8:30, I laughed at the coffee and donuts speaking about public protection, but we'll enjoy, maybe we'll have some different kinds of sweet stuff and warm coffee. It'll probably be a cold morning, but the longest night itself is December 21st. We're doing this the day before and trying to bring that information and that realization to people. So as we go into the Board of Supervisors meeting, we're going to attach ourselves to a housing agenda item and move forward in a planned time frame to speak the names of those who passed. And we're asking the Board of Supervisors to be honest, and housing saves lives. And this budget representation tells you how little interest there is and the ways in which they play with money. They prefer to house our unhoused folks in jails, sadly. So thank you. If others can think of something to add that I've totally forgotten, but again, I'm so touched by who is here. Everybody's right, more should be here, but this is more and a broader group than we've seen before. So thank you for being here and continue to hang in there. And Jared makes it very palatable. And if he can put up with LA, he can handle Orange County in his sleep. So we're glad for that.
Thank you so much, Pat. And thanks, Karen and Mara, for dropping links in the chat, and Dave. So for folks that are interested in joining us on not next Tuesday, the Tuesday after next for the BOS meeting, next week we want to host a public comment workshop to kind of walk folks through, especially for people that may have not provided public comment at a Board of Supervisors meeting in the past. We don't have a firm date for it because we want to basically schedule it around those of you that may be interested in participating. So if you're interested in learning how to give public comment, please drop your name in the chat, or you can also email us at peoplesbudgetoc@gmail.com. We'll schedule a short informative meeting next week and share some tools and best practices. And then we can also coordinate to meet up at the BOS meeting. So hopefully some of y'all can make it. If you're not sure whether you can make it, but want us to reach out, still drop your name and email address in the chat so that we can get in touch. And then next, I will turn it over to Karen again for an exciting raffle.
Awesome. So yeah, I mean, we are People's Budget. We know the holidays are coming up. We want to thank you for being a part of this, being interactive with us, really taking the time to share some feedback. And we wanted to, offer up a fun little raffle for folks that did sign up. So we're going to do it live. Bear with me just a second while I get this ready. So folks that attended and also registered are eligible, and I'll be sharing my screen in just a second.
We can all start drum rolling now.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of music on here. You're going to get some audio. So we're doing a live raffle. Hopefully, you know, we had about 50 registrants. I know we had about half the folks that came to show up, but we want to be fair. And I know a lot of people registered because they weren't able to attend today and wanted to get a recording and the presentation. So we want to honor, you know, folks that are interested and want to stay plugged in with our group. So this will be, and you'll have a choice of either there's 3 gift cards for Target and 3 gift cards for Vons. So as folks come up, you can decide which you would like. There is an opportunity to get them to receive them virtually if you want to just do an online gift card, or we can do a physical gift card and follow up with you for we'll mail a copy to you. So let me go ahead and spin the wheel here. So it looks like Nadia is our first winner. I'm not sure if she is here today, but Pat, I know you are in contact with them. So if you want to reach out right now and ask them if if you know which one they would like to get, we can kind of click that off the list. So we'll get to the next person and we'll take them out. And winner number 2. Is Danette Marie Abbott Wicker. All right. And let's do winner number 3. All right, Eve Garrow. Okay, and this will be number 4. Congratulations to Kara Sandoval. All right. And now for the 5th gift card. By the way, none of the PBOC people are eligible, in case you wondered. All right, Andrea. Congratulations, felicidades. And for our final gift card, all right, congratulations, Dean. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Let me stop sharing my screen. Daisy, I don't know if you'd like to put the present yet. There we go. It is not rigged. So again, we mentioned that we would be sharing contact info for Jared, his email, phone number, the website for Civilytics. Civilytics is, we can look at their social media. It's Civilytics or Civilytics Consulting on Facebook. Also, we can go to the next slide. Again, we're going to be sharing everything with y'all, so don't worry about like writing everything down, but People's Budget, you can stay connected with us. People's Budget OC on Instagram, Twitter, and also on Facebook. And yeah, I want to stop again if there's any other questions. I think we probably answered quite a few of them, but want to just again, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to our interpreter, Adriana Brindis, for being here. Thank you to People's Budget. Thank you to Civilytics. Really, really appreciate everyone and their contributions today, and everyone here for attending as well. All right, with that, we're ending a minute early. I can't even believe it. This has been the first workshop that has not gone over, you know, so enjoy the rest of your day. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Well done. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.